one of the good things about the movie, and I think there are a lot of good things about the film, as with our own story, it's not a perfect film, but it's a very good film because it resonates to today about what's happened to the news. I find people say, we all know that news has been denigrated down, entertainment values have overwhelmed it. So the question is, well, what happened to the news? And the overarching part of this movie deals with that question. What happened to the news, why it happened, how it happened, and yes, why you should care.
Do you think it was the fact that it became a 24-hour news cycle and it's like they have to report something, so they just start making things that aren't really news and just competing with each other?
Well, there are a lot of factors. I do think the 24-hour news cycle, more than a 24-hour news cycle, let's face it, with the internet, there's a deadline every nanosecond.
Yeah, there's pressure to get your story on before everyone else, so that makes it harder
to match the competition.
Yeah, exactly.
For example, not that long ago, a reporter for the New York Times or CBS News could start out the day and say, well, I can spend the day making telephone calls and wearing out shoe leather, going and talk to people, doing actual reporting. Now, your average reporter is expected to file two or three times during an hour on Twitter, expected to blog. He gets rockets from the office saying our competition is saying, what, can you match it? And calling back in 2 minutes and say, where are you? They're killing us. So this is part of the new atmosphere in journalism. But there are other factors, and these factors I do think that the film Truth deals with. Is the corporatization, politicalization of the news, which is much deeper and broader than I think most consumers of news realize, has led to the trivialization of news. An example would be, not that long ago, major news organizations and some not so major would have a bureau in Afghanistan. We still have our sons and daughters fighting and dying there. Now, it's much easier, much cheaper, to put four people in a room, having them shout at each other about Afghanistan, and by the way, typically none of them have ever been there, than it is to finance a bureau. The other place where it really cuts deep is in investigative reporting, deep digging investigative reporting. It's among the most expensive practices of journalism, and it tends to be controversial because you're trying to find out things that people, particularly people in power, don't want you to know.
Sure.
So as there's been consolidation of media, ever-growingly large international corporations get control of the companies that have sway over more than 80% of the national distribution of news. Those corporations have a lot of things they need out of Washington. So I recognize this is a family program, but if you'll forgive my reporter's French, you have very big business in bed with very big government in Washington. Whether that government at any given moment is controlled by Democrats or Republicans. And they want news for their mutual benefit, not for the public interest.
Of course.
And that's one of the reasons that to go to entertainment. If you talk about the Kardashians and somebody raises hell about it, well, what's the big deal? But if you do an investigative report about the mayor or the governor or the president or senator, that causes trouble. And if you take my point, the very large corporation does not want that trouble.